A flashbulb hit Maria's face as a photographer barked, "Who is she with? Who brought the child?" Protectiveness tightened across Maria's ribs in the same instant the crowd surged. She stepped from the line of guests so instinctively that Leo's small hand stayed threaded through her fingers. She planted herself beside Alexander Blackwell and lifted her chin toward the microphones. The immediate problem was obvious. A whispered allegation about Alexander's business meeting had become a shouted accusation on the carpet. And that accusation could become a headline that would topple donors and close doors for people Maria had never met. Maria's protectiveness of Leo and of their fragile steadiness decided her choice before she weighed the money Alexander offered. She would shield them both, even if the shield cost more than she expected. Maria pressed her clutch against her hip as cameras angled toward her. She did not have a publicist's training. She had a child's sketch folded in her pocket and a worn locket at her throat. Behind her, Leo kept his eyes down and shuffled his sneakers against the red line. Maria's face stayed composed because leaning into panic would let the photographers read her panic. The crowd shouted questions. One voice called, "Is this a stunt?" Another demanded, "Did he embezzle funds?" A man pushed forward with a recorder. Maria angled her body so his microphone passed above her shoulder and toward Alexander. She forced a smile and held Leo closer. Alexander under his breath, his voice low but taut. "You don't have to, Alexander," she answered. Voice steady enough to meet his "I do." She his name to anchor the public frame, not to him alone. Her action shifted something tight in the crowd. Cameras recalibrated to the pair, because the story changed from accusation to a possible private relationship. That quick redirection brought a few breaths. They moved behind the velvet rope into a private corridor, where the air smelled of perfume and disinfect. A prom manager took over immediately, guiding them with clipped instructions, "Smile through the cameras. Keep Leo visible. We'll get you through the main hall." Maria watched the prom manager's mouth form each syllable like a script and answered with small nods. She kept Leo steady by letting him hold the strap of her clutch. His fingers, warm and small, were an anchor. A camera angle cut to a live social feed. Someone had posted a candid of Alexander stepping into a closed meeting earlier that night. Comments piled up. Maria read a line aloud in a whisper. "They say a lost document proves insider trading." Her throat closed at the words, not because she believed them, but because of what they could do to a man's work and to the people whose livelihoods depended on it. Alexander's jaw tightened. He nothing but his hands, large, controlled, closed around the edge of the corridor wall until his knuckles paled. A journalist intercepted them near the service lift. He thrust a recorder under Alexander's nose. "Mr. Blackwell, care to comment on the leaked meeting? Were you directing funds improperly?" Alexander moved forward a step, then halted when Maria stepped between them and the reporter's microphone. Maria felt the journalist's breath, the cheap perfume, the hot press of his questions. She laid her palm lightly on Alexander's chest, an odd, practical gesture meant to physically keep him from stepping forward. "Alexander," Maria, meeting the journalist's eyes without flinching, "we're here for the gala. We came to support the cause." Her voice cut through the interrogation because she named the event and the purpose. The journalist's face sharpened, sensing a different storyline, and he pressed, "Are you too? We reappear tonight," the prom manager said, sliding a small paper with talking points into the journalist's hand. The manager did not use Maria's name. He used phrases composed couple, charitable supporter, instead. Maria let him. Each careful lie was a cost, she calculated. The corridor opened into a service hallway where staff moved with practiced invisibility. Alexander's walk was a study in control. Even anger was measured in him. He glanced at Maria twice, once with a glance that tried to assess whether she would break, and once with an odd, quick look that contained something else. Surprise, maybe, that a woman from a modest hotel room could choose to stand in the press path for a man he had expected to face alone. Maria felt an emotion shift when she saw that look. Protectiveness slipped into doubt. Why would she be here, he seemed to ask silently. Was she being bought? She answered with action. She tightened Leo's grip on her hand. Later, in a cramped anteroom beside the ballroom, Alexander's voice went low and urgent. I need you to keep this up for the night. Pretend, stay on my arm. I will pay you. He held out an envelope with bills inside, donned to take money from him, Maria thought, but she did not speak it. Leo's breath was a small thing against her leg. His presence reframed every calculation. Maria hesitated. She had bills of her own stacked in a drawer at home, overdue ones with polite, almost pleading letters. She had scheduled shifts and a school pickup the next morning. She had a son who trusted her to be honest with him. Why me? She asked finally, because you were brave enough to step forward, Alexander, his words precise. Because you looked like someone who could carry a story without asking for more. His mouth tightened, the crease in his brow deepening. Maria felt another emotion shift then. Doubt blurred into a wary empathy. She saw the lines at his eyes and the diagonal scar near his eyebrow. She saw a man who had learned to hide things. They re-entered the ballroom as the trustee rose to speak. The chandeliers caught on crystal and sent pinpricks of light across the polished floor. A trustee raised his voice mid-toast and demanded an explanation about the alleged meeting. Voices around the table began to murmur. Some guests nudged cameras toward Alexander. The manager whispered orders into Maria's ear, and then the trustee turned his attention to her. Miss, what is your relationship to Mr. Blackwell? He asked sharply. Maria's smile felt practiced, but her hands were steady. Blackwell and I are here together, she said plainly. We re-supporting the Gala's mission. She made it sound like a fact, and that firmness carried. The trustee's eyes narrowed. He pressed. Do you know the details of his business dealings? No, Maria, I only know him as a man facing a difficult moment right now. Her answer was small and human. It redirected the conversation from technical financial claims to the immediate human image of a man surrounded by a woman and a child. An image like that could soften a headline. It could make readers hesitate before they printed a charge. Backstage, a live social feed had already begun to recirculate a different photograph, one showing Maria's crayon drawing peeking from her handbag. The drawing was a child's scribble of a building with a sun in the corner and a stick figure labeled Mom. A socialite laughing beside a refreshment table pointed it out. The laughter turned into a soft, surprised murmur. Alexander glanced at the drawing when a flash reflected it on a phone screen. His expression thinned into something real, an awkward sympathy that was not usually part of his public face. Maria watched how his shoulders eased almost imperceptibly. The trustee's public ultimatum landed near the end of the evening when he stood and demanded exoneration. He threatened to withdraw funding unless the allegations were addressed. The murmurs grew into a low pressure against the ballroom's decorum. Alexander could have denounced the trustee's claim or walked out. Instead, he turned to Maria in front of the tables, and she felt the full weight of a decision shift onto her shoulders. The room expected answers. Maria had to supply them. She spoke directly into a microphone the prom manager held, and the room fell to a hush the way a hand lowers a glass. I don't know the details of Mitter. Blackwell's meetings, she said, keeping her voice even. But I do know the people who will be affected by the decisions made in these rooms, employees, families, children. Tonight we are here to support the work of this foundation. It was not a legal defense. It was a human appeal. Some guests wavered. Cameras lingered on Leo's scuffed sneakers. The trustee's face hardened, but the conversation lost the rhythm of accusation and shifted into something negotiable. After the toast, Maria was ushered aside with Alexander and the prom manager. The manager leaned close and hissed, "We need you to agree to appear at a charity interview tomorrow. Say you're a long-time friend. It will steer coverage away from the leak." He looked at the envelope of money on the table. Maria counted the cost in real time. Another lie. Additional days in a suit and heels she did not own. More exposure for a son who did not ask for any of this. She had not planned to trade moral questions for emergency pay. Leo hummed a small song under his breath, oblivious to the choices twisting around his mother. Maria's protectiveness hardened into resolve. She nodded to the manager and turned to Alexander. "I will do the interview, Maria," and she added quickly, "but not for the money." For Leo, her voice carried a precise clarity that quieted any further debate. Alexander watched her as if measuring how much she would keep giving. He did not lean into gratitude. He registered an odd, private relief instead. Outside the ballroom, on a shadowed balcony that smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and cold metal, Alexander finally let his composure crack. The cameras couldn't see them there, but his hands trembled as he admitted the origin of the scandal. "It started with a meeting that should not have happened," he said, "and a paper that landed in the wrong hands. I was trying to protect a project, but I did not consider who it would hurt." His voice was steady enough, but it carried a weight that made Maria step closer. Maria listened to details, dates, names, a misfiled contract that made the accusation concrete. She saw evidence of error, not malice. That shifted her next emotion. Doubt moved into clarity. The clarity forced a new choice. If Alexander had been reckless, then the cost of sheltering him might be larger than she thought. If he had been trying to protect people, then the story was more complicated than a scandal headline. Maria considered letting the truth go public. She considered the promise of quiet protection that would save livelihoods. "Why would you risk this, Maria?" Voice low. Alexander stared out over the city's lights. "Because some of what we do matters beyond the bottom line," he said. "And because I feared that exposing it would hurt people who don't deserve to lose their jobs." Maria's mouth tightened. Her hand moved toward the locket at her throat. She thought of Leo and the little errands that kept him safe. Groceries, the school bus, the call to a teacher when he needed help. She thought of the crayon drawing. She thought of the trustee's ultimatum. The night's tension sharpened into a decision point. Back in the prior office, Maria negotiated language. She proposed a small concession, a statement acknowledging the meeting while pledging an internal review. She for a guarantee that no layoffs would happen as a result of the leak's coverage. The prior manager frowned at the audacity of her request, but he kept his voice neutral. "If the trustee agrees, we'll reframe the story as accountability, not culpability," he said. A deal was hammered out in quiet phrases and guarded promises. The trustee agreed to a moderated statement in exchange for a written plan for an internal review. Maria felt the moral compromise like a stone in her shoe, inescapable and close enough to bleed into every step. She had bargained away part of her insistence on simple honesty. Alexander slid a small, engraved cufflink across the table toward her as he left the room. The gesture was less payment and more a private acknowledgement. Maria put the cufflink inside her palm without comment. They left the gala with a different narrative trailing them. Cameras would show a composed pair. Some headlines would call it a night of crisis managed. The public version had shifted enough to protect institutions and, for the moment, people's livelihoods. In the hotel later, Maria tucked Leo into bed in a small room that smelled of soap and coffee. Did we help him, Mom?" "We did what we could, Maria," and she leaned into his hair and breathed in the smell of shampoo and crayons. She felt the night's emotion compress into fatigue and a hollow sort of relief. She thought about the cufflink folded in her palm and the bargain it represented. Safety purchased for others at the price of personal exposure. She sat on the edge of the bed and unfolded the crayon drawing. Leo watched her with sleepy curiosity. "Will people know the truth?" he asked. "Some of it, Maria." She did not promise more than she could keep. She lifted the cufflink out of her pocket and set it on the bedside table where the lamplight made its gold face warm. The object was small and heavy with meaning. It was a token, a private agreement between two adults who had traded different currencies for the same result. Outside the window, the city's lights blurred into a distant glow. Maria closed the door softly as she left the bathroom and tucked a blanket around Leo. On the table, the cufflink sat near the folded crayon drawing. Maria reached out and straightened the drawing so the stick figure labeled Mom faced the cufflink. She did not speak the bargain aloud. She turned the lock and left the room. The night had resolved a public problem, but it left a private ledger open. The cufflink was a promise and a reminder of what she had exchanged. As she closed the hotel door, there was a small sound, the click of metal meeting wood, and in that sound lay the night's consequence. She had chosen to protect a man and, in doing so, had stepped into a life more complicated than the one she had planned. She held that complexity like a secret and, for the first time that evening, allowed herself to consider what she might ask of Alexander tomorrow. The final image of the night was concrete, a child's crayon son beside a polished cufflink on a chipped hotel table. That juxtaposition would stay with Maria not as a metaphor, but as evidence of the deal she had made. She turned away, pulled the door closed, and in the hallway paused to pull her clutch tighter under her arm before the hotel staff's soft footfalls carried her to the lobby. The chapter ended with the small, ordinary motion of placing her keys into her bag and stepping toward the elevator, the cufflink's weight still warm in her palm. Maria shoved the service door open and pulled Leo behind her as a camera flare cut across the tile. Protectiveness tightened her chest the way a mother's grip tightens when a stranger reaches for a stroller. A man in a greasy jacket, Marco, the paparazzo who had been trailing them since the lobby, thrust his lens forward and barked a question at empty air. "Who are you with?" he shouted. The corridor smelled of bleach and spilled coffee. Maria did not answer the man. She bent, kept her voice low, and tucked Leo's small hand into her palm so his fingers could not slip away. "Stay close, Leo," she told him. Leo's knuckles were warm and sticky with the crayon he had folded into his pocket. He looked at her, eyes wide, and Maria heard the tremor in his breath before she tried to steady her own. The first problem was immediate. Cameras could turn a private evening into a headline. The second problem was larger and already obvious to anyone watching the press line. The man they kept snapping was Alexander Blackwell, and the angle they wanted to sell painted him as careless, or worse. Maria had stood under those lights once before that night when a photographer had shouted questions about who the child was with. She could still feel the sting of that earlier exposure at the back of her neck. The stakes were clear and loud enough that she no longer thought in sentences. She acted. A voice behind them said, "Ma'am, please step away." A hotel security guard moved in, hands flat and polite. Marco pivoted, angling his camera faster. Maria slid forward, shoulders squared. "I am not leaving him," she said. "My son is with me." The guard kept a polite distance. The cameras kept clicking. They forced their way deeper into the service corridor, where the carpet muffled footsteps and the lighting grew cooler. Maria counted exits and doors. Her hands worked by habit, checked the clutch, make sure the thin leather strap watch sat snug, feel for the locket at her throat. The locket had the child's photo pressed into it. She felt its worn edge like an anchor. Leo curled nearer and whispered, "Mom." Maria looked at him and found her answer in the set of his jaw. Protectiveness moved her feet before fear moved her voice. An assistant in a navy blazer pushed past them and glanced back. "Alexander wants to contain this," she said without stopping. "Go to the mezzanine." Now, Maria's pulse jumped. She recognized the woman's tone. This was not just hotel staff. It was the kind of urgency that carried calendars and headlines. The assistant's hurry pulled Maria along even as doubts began to open like small doors in the back of her mind. What would she ask in return? What would she lose? They came up a carpeted stair and into the mezzanine, where crystal chandeliers reflected tiny stars into the faces of people who were supposed to look composed. Maria caught a fragment of a conversation as they passed an open doorway. "If those go live, we have a smear by morning," a flat voice said. "We need a visible story that's controlled." The voice belonged to Evelyn, Alexander's director. Maria felt the words land like stones. The press could sculpt him into callousness. That meant reputations, stock ticks, and people on company payrolls would sway. She had her son to protect. She had reasons to be careful. They found a quiet corner of the mezzanine, a false calm lined with velvet chairs. Leo sat on her lap and resisted sleep, fingers tracing the seam of her dress. Maria listened as Alexander spoke to Evelyn in measured phrases. She stayed close enough to hear, but far enough to claim she was not eavesdropping. "We contain it now. Evelyn, anything delayed will be interpreted as weakness." "The edited shot is already circulating." Alexander's voice was low. Maria had never seen him close. Tonight she had watched him hold a public mask until his jaw thinned. Even from a distance she could see how the composure sat like armor. The situation sharpened. Maria counted consequences in practical terms. Cameras could follow them to Leo's school, to the clinic where he had his last cough, to the grocery where she bought bread. A smear might create a web of questions she could not answer without exposing the small, vulnerable edges of their life. Sasha or Elena, names she did not know for their children's schools, might read a headline and decide Leo's mother did not belong. Protectiveness bent her toward action again, but the plan would have to be precise. A younger reporter found them at the mezzanine railing an hour later, while Alexander moved through the ballroom for a separate interview. He wore a practiced smile. The reporter stepped into Maria's space, press badge swinging, and asked, "Are you with Mr. Blackwell? Is that your son?" The words fell sharp and plain. Leo made a small noise and pressed his face into Maria's neck. "He's my son. Maria, please leave us alone." The reporter pushed. "This will run. Details help." Maria's shoulders tightened. She did not answer politely. She kept Leo between her and the cameras and said instead, "No. I'm not part of this." Her voice was steady, but each syllable was a choice. The reporter leaned in. "You can just walk away from a story like this," he said. "People will assume. Call your editor." Maria replied, "If you print lies about my boy, I will speak to a lawyer." The guard who had been near them before returned and showed his badge to the reporter. The reporter stepped back, muttered, and left for the line. Outside the lobby, a small commotion shifted the balance. Marco had not left. He had sold an unflattering angle to a tabloid that morning, and a comp had already been circulated on an online feed. Maria saw the headline on a phone screen held by a passing guest. Edited close-ups, a cropped hand, a caption that implied a private negligence. The image framed a moment that did not exist the way the public would read it. Seeing it, Maria's certainty seeded into cold doubt. If the edits could change context, could she trust any plan the office offered? She felt the first real fear of how permanent a single photograph could be. She bumped into Alexander by accident in a service elevator as doors were closing. He had a junior publicist just behind him, a man with a tablet and a look of perpetual alertness. Alexander's expression registered surprise when he recognized her. "Ms. Alvarez," he said, the name precise. Maria folded her arms around Leo and met his gaze. "Blackwell," she said, "my son is not a prop." Alexander studied her for a long breath. The publicist, Ruth, cleared her throat. "We need to be careful. Ruth, please. I want to leave him." Maria interrupted. The words came sharp. Alexander's hand tightened on his cuff, as if locking something into place. "I know what your team is trying to do," he said. "If this looks staged, it will make things worse. Then make it look real. Maria, make sure no one follows us home. Make sure his school does not get calls. Keep cameras away from daycare. Help us, and I'll help you." Talk grew faster. They tested edges in quick lines. "You can ask for privacy and then walk into a controlled photo." Ruth, "We need optics." Ms. Alvarez, "We need guarantees." Maria returned, "We need a hotel room staff who want tea leak." We need a check for the week I am missing at work if this goes wrong. We need you to take this seriously. Mir. Blackwell, Alexander looked at her, and then at Ruth. Evelyn, he said, hear her out. Evelyn arrived a moment later, and they shifted into a small service stairwell, narrow, fluorescent, smelling of hot bulbs. The stairwell compressed their voices into urgent fragments. We can stage this, Evelyn, but we will not pay for favors. We will frame you as an escorted guest and release a single image to our chosen outlet. It will undercut the narrative the tabloid is pushing. We need cooperation now. Maria heard the calculation in Evelyn's tone. Headline control, immediate damage, limiter. Maria's reply was direct. You help Leo with a week's childcare costs. You keep my name out of the first release. You promise no follow-up interviews. You guarantee no one turns up at the school. In return, I will walk into the press line with you. The negotiation became a series of short, sharp exchanges. Money. Evelyn, temporary assistance while you handle childcare. Only that. Maria's hands were steady. Alexander listened, and for the first time that night his voice showed strain. If you can do that, he said, I'll sign off on it. But you must follow instructions exactly. One wrong move and the narrative flips. Maria swallowed. I will not let my son be used, she said. Do what you promised. And I will not give reporters a reason to pry. The pact formed on a narrow stair. A check on the table when she asked for it, a line of security names, and a single condition that sat heavy. She would act as his escorted guest in front of the cameras. Ruth left to set the plan in motion. Maria felt her blood move through her wrists. She had traded a private inconvenience for a public lie. The action tasted sharp, but Leo's safe night mattered more than the truth on a glossy page. They dressed for the stage photos with a strange choreography. Alexander's team moved Maria into a small prep room where a stylist smoothed a thread at the hem of her dress and refastened a strap on Leo's tiny blazer. Someone fussed with her hair. Maria felt hands she did not know adjust the locket under her dress and then leave it alone. Alexander stood in the doorway watching the room like a man who measured risk the way others measured calories. He offered no easy smile. Maria, he said simply, when we go out there, keep him near you. Don't say anything to reporters without me. Maria met his eyes. I know, she said. I will do as you ask. The red carpet entrance was a churning of flash and sound. The surface underfoot was padded, a strip of calm they had created between the crowd and the ballroom. Cameras snapped in quick, even bursts. Maria followed the cue points she had been given. Step, look, small hand on his arm. She felt every click like a small hammer. Beside her, Alexander kept his jaw tight and his shoulders controlled. At one moment, a flash was so bright that Maria instinctively lifted a hand to shield Leo's face. Alexander reached with a practiced motion and steadied her wrist with a thumb that pressed once and let go. The contact was brief and precise. It pulled an unintended honesty into the staged movement. A photographer kept aiming for a close crop, and Alexander shifted to cover the gap. Maria slid closer to him in a way that was required by the pose but also protective. Leo, stay close, she said into his ear. Hold my hand, he did. They moved down the red strip and past the press line. Marco angled for a detail shot, and a young reporter called a leading question. Maria did not answer. Alexander spoke when needed, a single sentence that redirected the clip to charity work. Thank you for your interest tonight, he said, voice flat but steady. The cameras liked a tidy story. The chosen outlet got the image that evening. Maria at Alexander's side, Leo tucked into the crook of her arm. The tabloid lost their sensational angle because the release told a different truth. They reached a point where the staged narrative had held. Maria felt the exhaustion like a slow bruise. She had traded a private hour for a public lie, and the calculus still felt raw. She saw Alexander's face once in profile as they stepped away from the lights. He loosened his jaw as if letting a held breath escape. In the hotel valet car, the back door closed and the noise of the city slipped away. The chauffeur drove for a while without speaking. Leo curled against Maria and began to sleep, his crayon, protected drawing peeking out of his pocket. The quiet in the car changed the tone of the night. Maria watched Alexander in the dark reflection of the window. His profile cut a line that had nothing to do with headlines. He reached into his jacket and drew out a small envelope. He passed it to her with a flat, unreadable expression. "For Leo's week," he said. Maria opened it and found a check and a short note from Evelyn confirming the staff names and the privacy assurances. She looked up and met his eyes. "Thank you," she said. Alexander's response surprised her. He did not answer with a grand line. He instead, "You shouldn't have had to do that." The sentence landed without apology, and then, in the low space that followed, a half-confession. "This could have been handled privately. I failed to stop the leak." Maria absorbed the words. They were not self-pity. They were the sound of someone who had tried to hold a complicated machine together and found a seam undone. She felt pity, then a crack of something softer. Then she reminded herself of what she had traded: safety for an image. A small twist arrived as the car pulled into Maria's street. Ruth called from Alexander's line and asked for a follow-up. "We need to be sure the school has no questions. Can you meet the liaison tomorrow at 9? Maria looked at the check again, then at Leo's sleeping face. She felt the shift within herself from reluctant complicit to negotiator with agency. "Yes," she said, 9. The liaison's name was recorded, and Ruth promised to block any calls that night. The promise was a hinge for the next step of their arrangement. Before the door opened, Marco's name popped up on Maria's phone. An anonymous tipper sending a message that said the tabloid had been paid by an unknown source to push the edited image. The tipper offered nothing but a rumor. Maria felt that small, cold spike of anger. Someone wanted to weaponize this. She looked at Alexander, and the look between them hardened again from personal to strategic. "Find out who bought the image," she said. "I want names." Alexander nodded. The night was not over. They stood in the doorway of her small apartment, and Alexander waited on the stoop until he was certain Leo was safe inside. He handed Maria a card with a private number. "If anything happens, call me directly," he said. "Do not go to the press. I want Maria." She closed the door after them both and leaned against it for a long beat, feeling the texture of paint and the faint smell of Leo's shampoo on her clothes. The immediate threat had receded. The small conflict of that night had a resolution. Staged images, a check, a promise. But the larger current, who had edited the photo and why, and how long this protection could stand, remained active. Maria laid Leo in his bed and smoothed the blanket over his chin. He muttered in his sleep, his mouth forming the small words he learned that day. She placed the crayon drawing on his bedside table where she could see it. It showed their apartment and a stick figure mother holding hands with a stick figure child in front of a hotel. Someone had sketched a small square that might be a camera. The picture looked ordinary and honest. Maria pressed a finger to the crayon line and thought of the evening's bargain. She did not feel transformed. She felt a quiet determination to protect what she had and to hold people to the promises they had made. Before she left Leo's room, her phone buzzed with a short message from Ruth. "Good job tonight. We have one more step tomorrow. Evelyn will call with logistics. Sleep if you can." Maria set the phone face down and exhaled. She sat for a moment in the darkened kitchen, counting the small inventory of the night. The staged photos, the check, Ruth's card, and the knowledge that Marco's sale suggested a buyer with motive. The twist of that sale changed the equation. A paid leak was not random. Someone had targeted Alexander for damage. She went to the window and watched the street lamps. The city below moved on, deliveries, cabs, someone taking out trash, but Maria's life had bent around one concrete decision made in a fluorescent stairwell. She had negotiated a lie to protect her son. She had traded her private hour for a promise on a piece of paper. The chapter closed on a narrow scene. The car pulling away, the phone vibrating once more with Ruth's confirmation. and the locket cool against her skin. That final sound was not a flourish, it was a concrete beat. Tomorrow at 9, the liaison would come, and the next choice would be made with other people watching. Outside, two things remained true and clear. Leo slept, and the cameras were still hungry. Maria slid down the table and felt the check in her palm as though it were a small rock that might break or build a bridge. She tucked the envelope into the locket box on her dresser and turned off the light. In the last darkness, she rehearsed exact words to say to the liaison and to the reporter if asked. She practiced short, factual sentences so that her voice would not wobble. She knew now that her protectiveness would become negotiation and decisions. She also knew one other thing with certainty. This night had shown her how many people could move her life without knowing her name. The next morning, this meeting would not be private, and the danger of the edited image suggested there were more hands on the wheel than she had seen. The door clicked shut on the apartment, on the staged headline, and on the immediate crisis, but the night had left a small, sharp echo that would shape their next steps. A camera flash split the balcony air and a lens-voiced shout cracked. "Child with the billionaire, get the shot!" Maria's hand was already over Leo's back before she registered the photographer's nameplate glowing under the flash. Suspicion tightened at the base of her throat. She felt it as a practical, sharp knot that told her someone had planned this angle. Maria pulled Leo behind her, heel scraping the marble, and shoved the sliding door closed with her shoulder while marble shattered in reflected light outside. She smelled the gallery perfume of the Gala through the glass, citrus and expensive musk, then the pressurized heat of bodies pushing by the entrance below. Maria's first move was always the same: protect the small person at her side. Leo's fingers found the seam of her clutch. He whispered, "Mama, and gripped harder. Maria answered with a short nod and a chin now set to stop any photographer from forcing a frame that would mark them. The balcony light threw stark lines across Leo's face. His missing front tooth flashed when he mouthed a question. Maria his name quietly, and the word was a new anchor. The first 5 steps inside the suite felt like a negotiation. 1 foot forward, 1 arm across Leo, the other hand hunting for the card on her phone where she D-typed Alexander Blackwell's name a dozen times, in case the Billionaire's team turned their desperation toward her. She had lied for money before. This was different. She had never counted how often a lie might shield her son from a camera's single, sharp claim on truth. A security guard's bulk filled the doorway as the suite's anticamber door banged open. Marco's voice came from the corridor, closer and grating. "You can keep them inside, they'll run," he said. Maria turned and saw the press badge clatter on the floor between a cluster of shoes. She recognized the plastic bivel and the laminated photo of a man she'd seen since the lobby. Marco had been the one in the lobby earlier, the one who tried to force a lens through a stroller. She felt his presence like a pressure at the edge of the night, and now she had the badge under her shoe. Evelyn, the proud director, arrived with a folder snapping in her hand and a face that had learned to read panic as a market risk. "Maria," Evelyn, brisk and close. "We need you to go out with Alexander and make this look civil. 1 step, 1 smile, 1 statement. You can do that, right?" Her voice had the clipped cadence of someone who learned to order outcomes like pieces on a board. Maria listened to the list of instructions that came next. The exit point, the phrasing for the cameras, the angle to pose Leo at. Each item landed like a small requirement on Maria's life. Security would pay, Alexander's team would clear the path, and the cameras would be controlled for 3 minutes. Maria's chest tightened with an immediate calculation. The money would keep Leo in his school for another month. The cameras would give them a single night without harassment. She felt the tension in her bones, first suspicion, then a hard practicality. "Tell me what to say," she replied, speaking like a woman who had learned to measure words by how quickly they folded into protection. Leo glanced up, and Maria saw the winter light in his hazel eyes. He was looking not at photographers, but at her as if she were his chosen world. A hand at the suite threshold stopped their movement. Alexander stood there, the tailored line of his suit cutting a shadow into the room. He had the composure Maria had seen earlier, controlled posture, the precise cut of a man who ordered his private life the way he ordered his buildings. But his jaw was raw tonight. His usual stillness had a tremor that showed when he let the corners of his mouth go. Maria watched him from the side as he spoke to security. His voice carried low and measured, but when he looked at Leo he unfastened for one small breath, Marco Alexander, naming the man with a softness that surprised Maria because she had expected steel. Leave now. You re-recorded for trespassing. His hand found the edge of the door like a man steadying a ledger. Alexander's words had the force of a legal notice. His eyes were not accusing so much as exhausted. Maria registered the fracture there, the public mask that could issue a command, and the private grief that matched the tremor in his hands. Her suspicion flipped towards something else. Gratitude, then a wary empathy. Evelyn's plan began to map itself in the suite. A staged exit, a shared line, a brief statement to the press. We will step out together, Maria, you hold Leo. Alexander will offer a brief thanks. We'll control the angle. You do exactly what I say, and security will clear a path. Evelyn's words were efficient, but Maria heard the unspoken. The cameras would be allowed to shape their faces for a headline. Maria thought about 3 minutes lived as a photograph. She thought about Leo's classmate, the way other mothers might watch the papers and whisper. She thought about reputation, and how it could reach into a child's classroom and rearrange a mother's nights. Outside the suite's glass, a single cameraman pushed forward, and the sound of a scuffle rose. Marco reached the door, elbowing in, and when Maria turned to put herself between Leo and the corridor, the photographer lunged forward with the wrong kind of certainty. For a second Maria saw only the press badge tumble, a smear of color, and the stub of a crayon at its edge. Maria's hand closed on the crayon scrap. She knew the pattern of Leo's strokes, heavy little circles, a rooftop drawn with a crooked line. The scrap matched the corner of a child's picture she had folded into her pocket that afternoon. Her stomach dropped with a new suspicion. This was not random, Marco Alexander barked, stepping between the photographer and the family. He sounded furious now. The control snapped hard into public edge. You will hand that to security, or I'll make sure you can work this floor again. Marco swore under his breath. He shoved the badge toward Alexander with a sneer. Maria felt the room tilt into an exchange that might spin them into papers or into police logs. Alexander took the badge and glanced at the time stamp as if it were a line item in an audit. He read the room number and the timestamp aloud, slow and deliberate. Room 302-20-347, Alexander. The numbers landed like evidence. Maria's mouth went dry. She remembered Evelyn's instructions, who had access to the suite floor, which staff had credentials, and how an inside pass made a staged angle possible. The idea that someone on the inside could plant a badge, a crayon, a child in a frame felt like a new kind of danger. Maria folded her hands around Leo's shoulder. She felt him press back with a child's automatic trust. Evelyn's eyes hardened. That timestamp doesn't matter unless we know who had access, she said. Her voice had the edge of two people trying to keep a scandal from becoming a story. Marco, was anyone with you at that time? Any security on your footage? Marco shrugged like a man who counted his ethics in invoices. No security, Evelyn. I shot from the corridor. I followed the movement. He tried to push for leverage. But Alexander cut him off with a look that said the night could be redirected. Maria felt the shift in Alexander's posture when the badge's details sank in. He didn't reach for the badge as a man would reach for a lost thing. He read it like a ledger that uncovered a vulnerability. He pulled a slim card from his jacket and held it against the badge, then made a call with a single thumb, locked the corridor. Cross-check staff access for the last 4 hours. Security, bring me the roster. Maria watched him move and saw strategy unfold. Immediate containment first, truth extraction second. She watched people follow order. She watched how a man who built companies reduced panic to a set of tasks. They waited while security notified the concierge and pinged the hotel's internal logs. Maria's hands would not stop folding over the crayon scrap. The suspicion that someone inside the Gala had orchestrated the shot took root and pushed at her. Her options narrowed. Comply with Evelyn and perform the exit, or refuse, risk the camera's hunger, and take control of the narrative in a way that might endanger Leo's quiet school life. Her voice was steady when she spoke, but her hands trembled. If this is staged, she said, then I want to be the story they sell to make their point. The line landed on Evelyn like a small revolt. Evelyn's face flushed with the quick calculation of a PR woman who prices risk in headlines. Maria, we need you to play along. One night safe exit, money for Leo's school. This will be contained. Her tone tried to soothe her like a strategist offering a contract. Maria's tension folded into decision. She could accept the staged exit, take the money, and keep their life stable for a breath. Or she could refuse and force Alexander to expose a setup that might escalate. The night had already made her make hard bargains. She was wary of another. Alexander stepped closer, his gaze on Maria. Not Evelyn, Maria, he said, and the name was careful. If you help me tonight, I will make sure the camera's done. Follow Leo. I will sign the school check myself. I will. He paused and his mouth tightened. He always measured promises. I will not let this be your child's first lesson in public humiliation. There was no grand gesture. There was a small, exacted offer. Maria felt a shift, fear that accepting would put them under his orbit in a new way, and a sudden warmth at his private willingness to act. Maria looked at Leo. He had folded the scrap drawing into a neat square, and now pressed it into his pocket like a claim. Alexander, she said, using his name because names made obligations legible. If this is staged by someone inside, root cause matters. Do you want me to pretend and walk away? Or do you want someone to find who did this and stop them from using children again? Her voice held the iron of a woman who would not barter away a child's safety for a night's quiet. A moment of silence stretched, and then Alexander answered with details instead of platitudes. Find out who accessed room 302. Find out who signed the badge out. If it was internal, I will not let this stand. But tonight we need control. Go with Evelyn for the exit. Stay close to me. If anything changes, step outside with Leo and wait for me. He like a man setting parameters in a negotiation. Maria accepted the terms with a nod, partly because she trusted that he would follow through and partly because the alternative, open cameras and open hurt, felt worse. They rehearsed the exit in 3 short motions. Door, smile, line. Maria practiced the exact tilt of her head for the cameras and the smile that said nothing but calm. Leo clung to the end of her sleeve and whispered, "Do I have to smile?" Maria laughed at the edge of her mouth and kissed his forehead. "Just a little, baby. We are leaving like grown-ups who know the secret of a quick smile." Her voice was small and precise. The ceremony of staging made Maria conscious of how many decisions a mother must make to keep a child untouched by a public wound. As they moved toward the entrance, Marco tried one last ploy. He pushed a question into the press line that landed like a grenade. Who paid you to be here? Whose idea was the child in the photo? His tone asked for a scandal, not a fact. Reporters smelled a lead. Evelyn answered with a polished phrase about family privacy and gratitude. Alexander stepped forward and accepted the cameras for a single moment. The flash flooded the entrance in a white wall. Maria held Leo, counted 3 steps, and felt each shutter click into her skin. But as they reached the threshold, a commotion broke at the far side of the exit. A hotel staffer came running, out of breath and holding a small packet of documents. "Sir, Mr. Blackwell, these just came up on the internal feed," he said. Alexander's hand tightened on the threshold rope while Evelyn shut her mouth. The man handed the packet to Alexander. Maria watched Alexander scan the contents, and his face changed from composed to something sharper, like resolve. In the packet was a set of access logs, time, coded and stamped, and a list of staff who had used master badges on the evening. One name repeated with a pattern: Mauricio, a senior event coordinator whose badge was logged through multiple back corridors at odd intervals. Maria watched Alexander's mouth close and then heard him say, "Lock him in. Security, bring Mauricio to the suit." Evelyn's jaw worked. This was the discovery they had feared could happen, and yet now it was in front of them, a rod of truth to be followed. Mauricio arrived minutes later, red-faced and sweating from running. He claimed confusion at first, then said the wrong corridor, then stammered that his badge had been used by a vendor. When Alexander produced the hotel floor footage, Mauricio's story collapsed into specifics. A delivery at 3:10, an argument near the service elevators, a handoff that wasn't his. Alexander pushed, precise and clinical, who received the delivery. Name them who signed for the badge. Mauricio's answers shifted like a man trying to sell a new alibi. Maria heard Marco mutter under his breath, "Inside setup." The word landed as a sound, not a sentence, an accusation. Evelyn snapped at Marco to step back, but the photographer's hunger for a story sped up into speculation. Then Alexander did something Maria hadn't expected. He stepped toward the hotel entrance and put the packet on the roped stand, pushing it into the reporter's realm. "Look," he said, loud and even. "We will give you the logs. We will not hide what happened. If somebody planted access and staged photos, we will find them." Start there. The reporters shifted, their questions fracturing from hunger to a more cautious angle. Marco tried to accuse Alexander himself, recounting a rumor about a staged grief photo from a year earlier, but Alexander's calm did not crack. Instead, he called for security footage to be played for the press, right there at the entrance. Maria felt the air shiver with the sudden pivot. The night was no longer a simple protected exit. Alexander's move turned the press into a tribunal where the planted files would be shown and named. Maria's heart hammered with adrenaline and fear. She felt her choice ripple into something larger than the 3 minutes she agreed to buy. The footage played on a phone screen held by security. In the loop, a courier carried a briefcase. A hand slipped a badge into a pocket, and a face Maria did not recognize, but that a reporter shouted, moved down the corridor with purposeful steps. The footage cut to a shot of someone from the vendor team leaving the floor with a tight stride. The room around the press line hummed into accusation. Evelyn's mouth pressed into a straight line. She had the plan to control lies, but the truth in video rewrote the plan. Maria's suspicion hardened into a decision. She stepped to the edge of the crowd and lifted her voice, clear and steady. "This child is mine," she said. "My son is not part of your setups. If someone staged him, I want them found. I will not be used to cover a lie." Reporters turned like a tide. Alexander's head tilted with surprise and then relief. He'd been negotiating public control, but Maria's line reframed the stakes as parental protection, not celebrity damage control. Evelyn swallowed and then nodded because Maria's public claim bought them a new kind of control, one the press could not easily spin into a salacious headline. Alexander stepped forward and said, "We will cooperate fully. We want whoever did this found and held accountable." The reporters shifted their questions toward Mauricio and the vendor. Marco, who had been trying to provoke a scandal, found the live narrative sliding away from his scoop. Outside, police arrived at the hotel's request. They took statements and bagged the badge as evidence. Mauricio was escorted for questioning under watch. The cordon remained tight around the press line as the hotel's security team worked through badge logs and private vendor lists. Maria sat down on the suit's sofa with Leo still on her lap, his small hand wrapped around her fingers. She could feel his breath on her wrist, fast and uncertain. When Alexander finally returned to the suit, His face wore a different set of lines, deeper, accountable. They were left in the sweet study together while the hallways emptied into procedural calm. Alexander shut the door behind him and leaned against it for a second like a man closing a ledger. "I'm sorry you were dragged into this," he said. Something like an apology breaking into a statement. He did not offer money again. He did not promise favors. He instead a direct question about the crayon scrap in Leo's pocket. Maria unfolded the small square and let him see the heavy circles of a child's hand. Alexander looked at the drawing and then at Maria. "Why did you bring him here?" he asked, practical and honest. His baritone carried no accusation. It carried a need to understand how his world had touched a domestic life. Maria felt a shift in herself, first suspicion, then indignation, then a blunt clarity, because the photographer cornered us in the lobby, and I had no other hand to hold. She said because he was scared, because I'd rather be on stage for 3 minutes than have him wake up tomorrow and find a camera on our doorstep. Alexander nodded slowly. "Leo is brave," he said to the boy, and Maria noticed his eyes soften in a way she had seen in no other crowd reaction that night. "Leo," he added, softer still, "you drew this." Leo, small and proud, nodded. "Good work." "I like the roof." Maria watched Alexander's patience convert into something that did not demand indebtedness, but asked for trust. He moved across the study and sat with a careful distance on the other side of the desk. He explained how internal access had been manipulated and how his company would begin internal inquiries first thing in the morning. He promised to bring the hotel's director into the review and to cover any fees related to tonight. Maria listened and catalogued each promise as if it were a ledger of safety. They spoke for a long time in short sentences. Maria direct questions about who would see the logs, how they would be handled, and whether Mauricio's claim could be validated. Alexander answered with specifics. Security would hold the footage under chain of custody, legal would be briefed, and the hotel's management would be formally notified. The language was businesslike, but in it Maria found an unexpected comfort. Someone with the means to trace a path through paperwork and find the exact hand that staged a photograph. The room finally quieted. Maria felt exhausted in a way that tightened her jaw and loosened the muscles around her eyes. Leo fell asleep across her lap, head heavy and warm. Alexander watched him with a look that was both careful and unfamiliar. It had the small tenderness of a man who recognized what fragile weight a child added to a life. Maria felt a tremor of gratitude she could not convert into immediate trust. Instead, she thanked Alexander in a plain sentence. "Thank you for not letting them take him in a photo tonight." He met her eyes and nodded once. Evelyn reappeared with a list of statements and a recording of the night's timeline. "We'll release only the facts," she said. Exhausted, "We make clear this was unauthorized. We limit commentary." Maria read the statement and found the phrasing acceptable. It did not promise to make the issue disappear, but it set the frame of responsibility outside of her shoulders. When the reporters thinned and the hotel corridor returned to the low hum of late-night staff, Alexander walked Maria and Leo to a small balcony that faced the city's scattered lights. He did not ask them to stay with him beyond the suite. He asked instead if Maria would let him arrange temporary tutoring for Leo if the school made a fuss. Maria yes to the tutoring because it sounded concrete and useful, not like a favor to be repaid with entanglement. Before they parted, Alexander folded the press badge into his hand and then, without flourish, handed it to Maria. "Hold on to this," he said. "It will be evidence. Keep Leo's drawing too. If someone tries to use them to make a story, we'll have the record." The simple exchange felt like a quiet bargain of safety. Maria slid the badge into her clutch and then the crayon scrap into her pocket beside it. The gesture made the night's chaos into a set of items she could tuck away and inspect later. At the suite door, Mauricio was being led in cuffs for questioning. His face was a study in denial and fear. Marco hovered by the ropes, a mixture of glee and chagrin twisting his features when he saw the footage playing on a reporter's phone. Marius' last look at him was of a man who had chased the wrong story. Alexander's security briefed the hotel manager and promised legal action if the staging was proven. Maria felt the night's arc close into something practical. Evidence, statements, and a plan to trace a setup. They stepped back into the suite and closed the door. The reporter's footsteps faded. Evelyn exhaled a sound like a file being closed. Alexander sat across from Maria, and for a moment the small space between them held very human things. Fatigue, relief, and an uneasy curiosity. "You did well tonight," he said simply. Maria looked at Leo, asleep with his head on her shoulder, and felt both the exhaustion and a small, steady pride. She rose and smoothed Leo's hair with a mother's motion. "We did what we had to do," she answered. The words were plain and true. Alexander watched her pack a small bag of things she always kept for nights like this. Extra pajamas, a pair of sneakers, and a favorite crayon box. He offered again, quietly, to cover any immediate expenses. Maria shook her head and then, after a pause, accepted a single check for the school fees. She wrote the amount on the napkin he offered and tucked the paper into her clutch. When she stood to leave, Alexander reached out and touched the thin crescent scar on her upper lip with a fingertip in a gesture that felt like recognition rather than pity. "You be careful," he said. "You make the right choices." Maria smiled then, small and private. "So do you sometimes," she replied. The sentence was neither confession nor accusation. It was an observation born of the night's shared decisions. They stepped into the corridor together. Outside, the hotel's manager spoke into a phone about vendor lists. Inside, Maria felt a closure that was concrete. Mauricio escorted under custody, badge bagged, footage logged, a promise of internal audit. The chapter of immediate danger was closed by evidence and by the choice to transform the night from staged image into accountable fact. Before Maria left, Leo woke and blinked at the bright corridor light. He curled his hand into her sleeve. "Mama, can we get ice cream tomorrow?" he asked. Maria laughed and squeezed his hand. "Yes, baby. We will get ice cream tomorrow." The promise was small and definite, one that would keep them tethered to ordinary life in the days after headlines. At the suite door, Alexander placed his hand gently on Marius' arm and, with a voice lower than it had been in the crowd, said, "If you need anything, call Evelyn. Call me if it helps." Maria looked at him for a moment and then nodded. She stepped into the night with Leo at her side, the badge heavy in her clutch and the crayon scrap warm in her pocket. They descended in the service elevator where the air smelled of coffee and detergent. The world outside the suite had narrowed to floor numbers and the hum of the hotel's late night machines. Outside the lobby, the press line had dwindled. Mauricio's name was already a rumor passing from mouth to mouth inside the hotel staff. Maria felt danger's shape lessen and the night's choices resolve into the bankable facts she could carry home. When they reached the street, Maria hailed a cab and watched the hotel's lights recede. In the back seat, Leo fell asleep against the glass, the city bleeding into a long blur of traffic lights. Maria pictured the logs and the footage and the stewarded evidence and felt the night's arc close into a set of actions that might keep them safe. She did not imagine more than that. She did not imagine gratitude or entanglement. She imagined only a child's quiet morning and a small, ordinary ice cream cone. Later, in bed with Leo tucked in and the crayon drawing placed on his bedside table, Maria opened her clutch and counted the checks and the napkin with the writing. Evidence, receipts. From outside, the city hummed. Inside, she folded her hands over the blanket and let herself breathe. The night's conflict had been resolved into the practical logistics of accountability. Mauricio in custody, security logs preserved, Alexander's team starting an internal audit, and a hotel manager who would have to answer for vendor access. Before sleep took her, Maria set the press badge and the crayon scrap side by side on the kitchen counter. She thought about the night's small bargains and the decisions she had made to protect a child. She did not feel triumphant. She felt tired, precise, and relieved in a way that had nothing to do with headlines. In the early morning, a phone would ring with more questions from investigators. For now, Leo slept and the immediate danger had been named and contained. At dawn, a knock came, not on their door, but on the hotel suite service log. It was the sound of procedure catching up to motive. Maria kept her eyes closed, then rose to open the bedroom door to the morning light. The concrete outcome of the night remained. A badge in a drawer, a child who would eat ice cream and go to school, and a set of promises given by a man whose public life had forced a private reckoning. That was enough for now. The knock at the suite door the next morning would bring questions, but tonight had ended with a small, clear decision. They had named the set up and started to undo it, and Maria would not let anyone use Leo as a photograph again.